I sat there, waiting for my turn to speak. My palms were sweating, and my leg was trembling slightly. Andy had convinced me that this meeting would be beneficial, that it would help me deal with the terrifying fear that haunted me because of my hatred, but I doubted it. How the hell could any of these women possibly understand what it was like to face our common enemy? When the girl in front of me finally finished her complaint about the neighbors and their intolerance of all things supernatural, applause erupted. I had already lost count of how many times I had mentally rolled my eyes. Of course, it wasn't that we hadn't all faced harassment. That her neighbor hadn't turned to violence was commendable, and I wouldn't complain. But unfortunately, this group was for everyone, and so I sat listening to other people's problems. Samantha, began a petite woman in black, with tiny glasses on the tip of her slightly skewed nose. Would you like to share? I took a deep breath, unsure of what was expected of me here. This was my first meeting, and shouldn't I have been brought up to speed gradually, not laid out all at once? None of these witches seemed to know who I was, but judging by the looks on their faces when my name was called, many had already heard of me. Sure, I said, trying to calm down. Where to start? The woman smiled slightly, exposing blackened teeth against her pale skin. From the beginning, darling, as a child, I lived in a small cottage with my mother and 3 older sisters. My father was killed when I was only 2 years old, so I barely remember him, but my mother kept pictures and often talked about him. When I was 5, the villagers found our cottage and lured my 2 sisters into town. A local boy saw them practicing by the river. They were drowned in the center of town. I was left in the cottage, and my mother and older sister went to try to rescue them. Mother was burned at the stake, but my older sister escaped. She came back for me, and we hid deep in the woods, away from civilization. Life had been good before, but gradually it became much harsher. Even with our magic, we didn't know enough to defend ourselves the way Mother did. We faced harsh winters, and my sister had to kill some hunters who came too close to our home. She wouldn't let me help, but I could hear their screams from the cottage. You must have been terrified, the young girl next to me said. I shrugged my shoulders. Better them than me, I replied, truly believing it. For many years, it was just me and my sister. The 2 of us against the world, or what we knew of it. We fought and argued like sisters do, but we also supported each other, and our magic grew stronger every day. Unfortunately, the ignorance of the people and their weapons grew along with it. We had heard of a few witch hunters raiding the crafting world, but those were just rumors. We believed we were in no danger. I took a breath and the presenter nodded, encouraging me to continue. One evening, a few days after my official initiation, I heard a rustling outside my bedroom window. When I looked out, I saw a young man, perhaps a little over 20, only a couple years older than me. He was stalking a deer in the woods. The sun hung low, and the light reflecting off his dark red hair made me hold my breath. Though I hadn't seen many men in all my years, there was something about him special. I watched him nimbly make his way through the undergrowth, and as he was about to shoot, I used magic to scare the deer away. He must have sensed it, because he turned around and met my gaze. I was terrified, but his gaze somehow calmed me down, as if the world around me had stopped. He left without saying a word. My sister worried for the next few days, setting up defenses around the house and reprimanding me for being careless, but I couldn't get that mysterious man out of my mind. Who was he? Why didn't he try to hurt me? Would he come back? That was the question that particularly irritated my sister. After all, he probably had friends who could come back and kill us. But as the days went by, nothing happened. Eventually my sister calmed down, and we returned to our normal lives. He crossed my mind less and less often. Nothing happened during the winter, but as spring came, my sister decided we needed to go to town. We hadn't been there since that fateful night when we lost the rest of our family, but the harsh winter forced us to go for seeds. Magic can help things grow, but as you know, we can't create something from nothing. Several people in the group nodded in agreement, and I continued, feeling the story flowing easily despite my recent excitement. We put on our cloaks and set out on foot for the city. The journey took us a day and a half, and when we arrived we were tired and scarred. Most of the townspeople we passed looked at us with suspicion, but no one seemed to know of our trade. We wandered down Main Street, looking at the various goodies and trinkets for sale. For a moment, I felt peace and happiness among the people of the town that had destroyed our lives 13 years ago. Although the thought of it still made me cringe, I suddenly realized that for the first time in my life, I wanted to be among people. I wanted to be among others. I was talking to a nice woman who carved tiny wooden figures and had just bought a small figure of a raven when I suddenly felt his presence. My eyes rose sharply, and I looked around until our gazes met again. My heart sank, and I felt his gaze pierce my damned soul. My sister approached me, saying something about food, but froze when she saw where I was looking. She yelled loudly, catching the curious gaze of the woodcarver, and immediately pulled my hand away. We headed straight back into the woods, and my sister took extra precautions to cover our tracks. I think she said "damn it" about 300 times as we made our way back to our camp. A couple of the women giggled, and I even smiled slightly, but my sister was right, and my smile immediately faded as I continued. That night, she insisted on being the first one on watch. I hugged her, said good night, and apologized for my recklessness. She told me she loved me, and that was the last time we spoke. When I woke up the next morning, she was nowhere to be found. I figured she had just fallen asleep, so I waited. An hour passed, then 2, but she never came back. So I headed back to our cottage. I swallowed hard, holding back the tears that threatened to overwhelm me. Part of me hoped I would find her there, but deep down, I already knew she was gone forever. When I reached our cottage, I continued wistfully. I saw that the door was off its hinges. I tried to strain my senses to see if anyone was around, but I couldn't focus. I was too anxious. Sneaking inside, I found that our sweet home had been ransacked and destroyed. Looking at my hands, I felt tears flowing freely down my face. I started crying, unable to cope with my emotions, and that's when everything went downhill. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat dry and sore and my tongue pressed against my palate like sandpaper. I heard screaming outside and immediately realized it was my sister screaming. Without thinking, I ran outside, ignoring the voice in my head screaming danger. I looked at my hands, covered in scars, with ugly wrinkled skin. The man I had that strange connection with was holding my sister by the hair, and she was kneeling in front of him and 3 other men. I will never forget her face that night, much anguish and despair, blood and bruises. Now tears were running down my cheeks, my voice thick as syrup. I screamed for them to let her go and take me instead, but he looked at me with the meanest, cruelest look that gave me goosebumps, and said he would not only kill her, but he would make me watch, and then he would kill me too. The women in the room opened their eyes wide, and some of them started crying too. I avoided meeting their gaze, afraid that if I did I would break down completely. I took a step forward to stop him, to at least do something about it, but he pulled out a knife and held it to my sister's neck. He stared at me like our mother once did when we were children, and then nodded in my direction. The others took that as a command and started sneaking toward me with knives in their hands. At that moment I realized that they were afraid of us, that they believed in our power, and I decided to use that to my advantage. I rushed back into the house and slammed the door behind me, hearing the exclamations of surprise and the angry shouts of the man who was holding my sister outside. I knew I didn't have much time. The men were already surrounding the cottage, and there were only a few moments before they would rush in. A sense of hopelessness swept over me. The tears had stopped for a moment, but my throat felt a little scratchy. It had been so long since I'd spoken so much, and it was starting to take its toll. But I couldn't stop now. The men were pounding on the walls and door of the cottage. Soon the noise stopped, and I heard my sister being dragged, by all appearances, towards the house. I dared to look out the window and saw the man stop with her just a few feet away from me. He smirked again, his smile, His smile that had once seemed enchanting to me now held only disgust. My sister's eyes met mine, and I saw the pleading in them. She was begging me to run, to escape at any cost. But I could not look away as he slit her throat and threw her to the ground, if she were nothing more than unwanted cattle. I expected to cry, to burst into tears, but instead I felt only numbness and cold, hard fury. He wiped the knife on her dress, wiping the blood off it, and put it back into its scabbard. Then he turned to me. "Oh, Samantha, your whole family died because of you. If I kill you now, it would be a mercy, so I will let you live. But remember, if you ever return to my city, or if I ever see you or your kind again, I will burn you all to the ground. Be careful, little witch, don't forget my warning." And then he was gone. As soon as they were gone, I rushed to my sister's body, but it was already cold and clammy. I knew I had come too late. I buried her deep in the woods, by her favorite tree. The digging took hours, for every crack of a branch made me rush back into the house, slamming the door shut for fear they might come back. But they never did. I took a deep breath, preparing for the creepiest part of my story. For the next 3 years, silence, rage, and hatred were the only things keeping me afloat, not allowing me to give up. Every time I looked at my sister's grave, my resentment only grew. As time went on, I noticed that everything around my cottage was dying. Death and decay surrounded me, and I knew it was my fault. At first I felt bad at the thought, for it wasn't what my sister would have wanted. But then again, she didn't want to die either. Then I had an idea, a perfect plan for revenge against those who had ruined my life and taken the lives of so many others. I was supposed to be their payback, but I couldn't just walk into town and start killing. That wouldn't work. I prowled the outskirts of the city under the cover of night, watching the inhabitants, too absorbed in their daily activities to notice me. First one child disappeared, then two. I saw parents clutch their children's hands tighter, worry growing in their eyes as they tried to figure out where the little ones had disappeared to. I knew it was only a matter of time before mass hysteria set in, and I had to proceed carefully to find the children of the man who took my sister's life. I let things subside and went back to watching, waiting patiently until finally Lady Luck smiled on me. Once I saw a chubby boy and a lanky girl following their father, and my rage could literally be felt in the air around me. I wanted to strike then, to let the children see me tear their father to pieces with my bare hands. But I knew it was him who should suffer, not the children. I noticed that the kids, especially the boy, loved sweets, so I took advantage of their love of all things baked to lure them into the woods. I could hear them walking, following the scent of tasty treats that led them right to my house. Finally, they knocked on the door, and I greeted them with a smile on my face, not daring to look back for fear of seeing judgment in the eyes of my companions. I led them inside where a table full of goodies awaited them. A few of them contained anesthetic to relieve any pain they might feel. I didn't want them to suffer, but my anger pushed me forward. When the children were asleep, I bundled them up and placed them in the oven. I was going to bake them alive and leave them for their father to find. I wrote the notes I planned to leave and turned the oven on full blast. I watched as the oven heated up and their clothes began to smoke. And then I heard my sister's voice, crystal clear in my head. She told me that what I was doing was wrong, that it wasn't what she would want. At first I resisted her, ignoring the voice, but she got louder and louder and got angrier and angrier at me. I turned off the oven and took the kids out. They had some burns, but otherwise they were unharmed. I went down to the basement to get the other kids, the ones I had taken out earlier. I was going to let them all go. When I got upstairs, I found the door kicked in and a man with crazy eyes and an axe in his hands standing in front of me. He attacked me, and though I fought back as hard as I could, he finally overpowered me. He knocked me out and left me lying on the floor. But before he took the children and left, he turned the oven on full blast and threw some straw inside. I woke up in a fire. The pain was so intense that I couldn't even scream. I managed to crawl outside and rolled around on the ground until I put out the flames. As I lay there, I watched my cottage engulfed in flames, and the tree in the backyard where my sister was buried burned brightly, as if awakening from the flames. And then, like a gift from the heavens, the sky clouded over and it rained. I don't know how long I lay there, waking up and then passing out again from pain and exhaustion. But when I finally woke up and saw the blue sky and the birds fluttering overhead, I made my way out of the forest, away from the city, and never looked back. I fell silent, expecting judgment and harsh words from those who had just heard my horror story. But there were none. "Thank you for sharing your story, Samantha," the host said, her eyes sparkling. "I know it was very difficult, but we appreciate your honesty. Your story reminds us that anger and hatred only breeds more anger and hatred, and that even in the darkest of times, we must find love and kindness." I nodded, took a deep breath and listened as the next woman began her story, realizing I could finally let go of the past.